All right, guys, thanks for coming together to start this campaign. The idea I told you about was everybody's going to be goblins with an underground dungeon lair. So your goblin boss has tasked you with trapping the dungeon, adventure proofing it, all that. What ideas do you have?
Okay, I know exactly what I want to do. All right, I'm going to play Knick-Knack, the labor union leader.
The what?
Yeah, dude, like these goblins, we got to unionize, okay? Like, or this goblin boss is just going to take advantage of us night and day, okay? Like, do these goblins have health insurance? First off. Yeah,
No.
like it was OSHA a thing. If it's not, it's gonna be. Damn right, it's gonna be. Like, are we using PPE while digging these shady, shaky ass tunnels? Like we've got to fix this shit. Like, this is what I want to do. That's my motivation.
Okay, we'll make that work. Josh, how about your character?
I was thinking of playing Grimclaw, the Shadow.
Yeah, that sounds more like it. So like a sneaky rogue type with like swords or something.
You think? No, he works in HR. I'm gonna focus on retirement plans for these goblins.
Curses.
It's like I'm also your liaison for human relationships. So maybe the humans don't have to come in here and kill us.
I would say, like, why would goblins have human resources?
Yeah.
Wouldn't they have goblin resources?
I'm the liaison with the human.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I liaise.
I did think of one. I think it'd be cool to play like an all goblin campaign where the idea is like you're like reclaiming your stolen loot. So like you raid castles and temples and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And no, that would be awesome.
That'd be so much fun.
Yeah. All right. Welcome everyone to Roll Havoc, where we are hoping to give you inspiration on your next lore check. With us today, he likes Pepsi, conversations about anthropology, and long walks off the shoulder of Orion. It's Ben Grunzel.
Those are all things in my battle axe bio. Yeah.
His motto is, "It ain't easy being green. If it were, everyone would do it." It's my friend Josh Plotkin.
That's right. But everybody is green with envy.
I mean, they usually are. Everybody's envious of something.
Mm-hmm.
So today we wanted to talk about our favorite races. You talk about character creation. One of the first things you always have to figure out is either your class or your race. Figured we've already talked about classes. So let's talk about these races. We're going to do our top 3. So I think let's start with maybe like our baseline number 3 and work our way up to our favorites.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Who wants to start it off? It's big to start off the baseline. I'm saying start the baseline number.
I'll go ahead and I'll be basic and I'll say my number 3, quick and clean, humans. Like usually I enjoy playing humans. If I'm looking for something a little more flexible, I want to spec into something kind of very, very specific that a race outside of that doesn't necessarily like to do. Because in most of the versions, like humans get bonus feats. They're very adaptable. They normally get like up until now in 5th edition, they were the only ones where you could assign your stat bonuses at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So it was just like you could kind of pick, like if you're an elf, you normally have to go with dexterity and intelligence or something like that. Dwarves get constitution and strength. So like I think humans were up until now, like we're the only ones where you could like adjust your ability scores at the beginning and really focus on one specific thing.
I mean, I really do respect that choice because the way I always thought about it is humans are what you pick when you want to focus on the class and what you want to do with the class rather than, I don't know, it feels like the other races always provided some different bonuses, but also really crafted kind of your role playing and the character that you had already. Whereas like human was, a blank slate. And also if you wanted to make a fighter, that was the best fighter because they started off with a feat.
Yeah. I mean, humans higher on my list. So I'll go into more detail later, but yeah, I mean, they're versatile. They can play just about anything. And that's going back to like, even in like basic D&D where your 4 basic classes were all by default human, and then elf, dwarf, and halfling were their own class. Those are very defined as like this is like one person's idea of what an elf is. So that's what everybody plays. But they've kind of always kept that I can be anything.
So like my number 3 is more like relatively new, because I know that the humans is kind of like a long heritage of all the different games. Mine was literally specifically the 5th edition Bugbear that they have right now, because I played
Pretty
it.
awesome.
What's so great about this? But I mean, I've seen the Bugbear for myself, but what do you like about it specifically?
They are mechanically optimized to be you put any melee class in this situation and they are just better at it than any of the other races when it comes to it, simply because they come with reach, they come with large size, they come with strength bonuses, and they sneak attack naturally, which is absolutely like at first level is just an absurd bonus in any combat. On top of that, they're a goblin
giant, they're sneaky fucking giant goblins. They're great.
They are. I mean, Bugbear originally was Boogeyman. That's where the term. So it really does make it feel that way, especially as level 1. I know that every time you fought a Bugbear monster, like in 3.5, they had 2 hit die, and if you were going to play a Bugbear, you basically had you had a level adjustment of 2, and then you already started with 2 hit die. So it was a 4th level character, and it kind of harks back to that heritage a bit, because I mean, you might only have 1 hit die, but you're hidden like a 4th level character.
Yeah, I always liked Bugbears as being like somehow even sneakier and creepier than goblins, even though they're big. And previously, earlier in 5th edition, like when it first came out, they're just like kind of big bruisers, which is kind of boring to me. Like you already have you have like ogres and all kinds of stuff. They're just big, heavy hitters in D&D. But now, like, yeah, like even though they're like technically medium size, they're strong, they can carry a lot, they can reach further than you think they should reach. You can't hear them coming, and they cut you deep when you don't see them. Like they're a boogeyman. They're like a Babadook. Like
yeah.
It makes them really creepy, and I
mean,
really like that.
You saw me in combat when I chose to use something with a 10-foot reach already.
Yeah,
like I was like literally like it's just like stabbing across the map. It's there's like something supernatural about it.
I like your class choice there too, because like especially you highlighted the benefits of the fighter class really well. The fact that you picked this Bugbear and the way that it works with the fighter class is really kind of cool, because it has the reach, and you picked up like a pole arm that you're using that like at a 15-foot, and it's like it's not breaking the game necessarily, like not really, but it's just kind of also just a really cool feature, and it meshes well with the fighter class is what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, it messes with, I mean, think about a paladin doing the same thing though. They're smiting from 15 feet away.
Bakram did in some cases,
exactly.
Yeah,
it's fun. Yeah, the idea that they're sneaky too is super. Is kind of just like icing on the cake. Like monstrous version, like I mean, I guess he already is monster. A scary version of Sully from Monsters Incorporated.
Yeah, it's a really good way. Yeah, because I mean, all the monsters are like really sneaky, and it makes perfect sense. But if you think about the different like goblinoids and like fantasy in general, they have, I think in Dungeons and Dragons, they do a really good job of making goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears have a very different vibe and feel when you create characters with them. They're not just like different shades of the same, race. They're like, no, like the bugbears are like the big beefy ones, but they're still goblins, and but they're probably a little bit more like solitary and creepy than like hobgoblins, which are like militant and are like, they are the fighter goblins. And then you have the goblins, which are just like, they're
sneaky swarm fighters,
sneaky swarmies.
My God.
Yeah, Ben, what's yours?
I think my third, it's hard to tier them actually, but I'm going to go with orcs or half orcs.
Nice.
Yeah.
As somebody who started in 2nd edition, it was cool that they brought half orcs in as a player race in 3rd edition because they're a little bit more monstrous. Pretty sure at least one of the designers has said they kind of wish they had just made them orcs instead of half orcs, because there's all these like, what's your backstory kind of icky questions, especially with young edgelord guys that don't, anyway. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
But I really like, so I liked it in Eberron when they were like orcs and half orcs are kind of blended together, that they bred with humans naturally over time, but they were kind of interchangeable. And
I like settings that don't make orcs bad guys. Like they don't make the orcs like always evil. Like Tolkien obviously set a precedent as like, no, these are orcs. These are like the minions of the enemy. This is the bad guy. So it's like in Middle Earth, that's fine. Like, yes, have Like honestly, like orcs in Middle Earth weren't like having spawn with humans or elves, they were eating them. That's like, that's like
Right.
they weren't, that's not how it worked. So there weren't
It makes it a little difficult to breathe
Yeah.
with somebody when you're eating them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there was, Tolkien was going for like an unambiguous bad guys, which
right.
doesn't, doesn't work for every story.
Well, and then I think of like the Elder Scrolls, if you guys have played, Skyrim or Oblivion or Morrowind, where it's like the orcs are just another race of people. And I mean, they've been allies, they've been friends with, they've been allies and they've been enemies with different factions and races over the course of the history of that planet. And it makes perfect sense that it's like, yeah, they're another intelligent race. Like I like settings like that are just like, no, like the orcs, if you're making orcs just kind of generally evil, like they kind of do in Faerun, like that's doing them a disservice, I think.
Yeah, and there's lots of different ways you can go with them. I mean, like, because I've kind of dug into, Tolkien is obviously inspired by like older folklore, and there's another version of the name Orkneus, which means like corpses of Orcus or something like that. The etymology of the word is really up for grabs, but I've seen other games that have like done it as like orcs are like the risen dead or something like that. And if I can ever actually like write up my ideal like Dark Ages, Middle Ages setting, like the orcs would be like basically created by necromancy and like slain warriors that have come back, and it still fits for everything, especially like the reckless endurance thing where like they don't die the first time they should.
Yeah.
They're not like zombies, they're just kind of like brought back, like literally brought back from the dead, and they've been twisted and look monstrous, but and that still keeps it as like, well, yeah, like everybody associates them with evil, but it's not their fault,
Yeah. So what do you like about playing orcs, or are they just like a favorite class for like
it just kind of lets you like cut loose and be a little bit monstrous without having to go to like high fantasy or worry like, find the special rule book to let you play an ogre or something like that. It's nice that it's like just one of the core things, like as a monster race, it's a little bit, everybody expects an orc to act a certain way. Whereas if you're playing a human and you just start acting really rude, that's, some DMs don't like that. But
yeah, I think it is kind of cool when you start getting the offbeat orc class like mixes, is like, okay, like playing an orc paladin, like that's always a really interesting thing to me, because that's not
wizards.
Orc wizards. I guess orc sorcerers kind of fall in with like them being wild creatures, so it's like maybe orc sorcerers is a little more common.
It makes so much sense because their survivability, like their natural survivability, balances out all the fragile
unless you're trying to min max in 3rd edition, and then it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You minus your charisma? Are you dumb? No.
Yeah.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed playing the one in Ben's Eberron game.
Yeah.
For all the same reasons. He was of both worlds. Very hard to kill, hard to perish.
Difficult to perish for sure. So speaking of Eberron, my number 2, don't laugh, my number 2 race, Dragonborn.
Okay.
Yeah. So I looked it up. We've talked about Dragonborn kind of briefly, and they did make their debut in 3rd edition in between the, like just before the PHP 2. They were officially in the PHP 2, but there was a module that set out like the rite of Bahamut that you had to do to turn a normal playable race into a Dragonborn. And so here's the funny thing, like I never saw that in a rule book. I never did. My 3rd edition experience with that type of stuff was like, no, you had to use the half dragon template, or you had to take that prestige class that turned you into a half dragon at the end of it. So it was like the only way you could get that kind of like monstrous reptilian dragon heritage type character.
Sorry. No, I just remembered the right is you had to build like this giant egg for yourself. Or something like that.
That sounds intense.
You had to sit and do it for a certain amount of time, and I was like, so who's gonna actually role play through this?
Yeah.
No. This just already happened, right? Like I already did it.
Can we just do this? So that was one of the things I was kind of bummed that I missed out on in 4th edition, because they're introduced in the PHP in 4th edition. So that was always really kind of neat. And I didn't play 4th edition, but when we started playing Eberron, I was like, I think it would be really cool to play like a dragon knight, literally like a dragon person who is a paladin. It was so much fun. I had so much fun playing this race, because it was just like, okay, so it's a monstrous race. Like people, even in Eberron, like they're not common. So it's kind of neat to have that interaction as a player to be like, oh no, I'm playing kind of like a weird monster thing that people don't react normally to. So that was actually really neat to me because I'm, all about the role play. The fact that they have a spectrum of the scale colors that you can use for different breath weapons and resistances and stuff, I feel like that was a really neat mechanic in 5th edition. It was a direct interaction that I wanted with that world, right? It's like, if I'm going to play a person who is, dragonborn, I want them to be able to breathe fire. So it's really awesome. That's I want to feel, like, look, the game is called Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, that's what I fucking want. Okay.
I'm a dragon in a dungeon.
I want to be the dragon in the dungeon. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's like, how did it take them so long to make a dragon person as a base race for the game? I mean,
it was balanced.
It's pretty obvious. Yeah.
Right. I mean, okay. So you even kind of illustrated it exactly. It's like a mindset difference on like, is this fun for players or do we need to make this reality? Something like they provided that right for people. They did that specifically because it's like, well, maybe some people are in the middle of games and they're going to love this so much they want to change. We should provide rules for that. And instead of just thinking it's like, why does that matter? Why can't we just give the stats for the right? Like,
well, and then they came out with the PHP too, and it's like, oh, it's just in there.
But like now, I mean, you look at the way that they design now, and it's all about like, what's going to be the most enjoyment for these guys? It's like, let's give them everything. Let's make them like what they're talking about, like with the next version of the game. They're like, let's give them like every single demonic background possibility for a race. Let's give them every single celestial background, but like they just want to give more options. I love how design's gone that way, and because it was available for you to do that, now you had a character for a long game that you really enjoyed.
It was absolutely, that's absolutely correct. It's like the character, it fits exactly what you want it to do. In the PHB, Dragonborn are pretty much tailored towards paladins. They get bonuses to strength and charisma, so that makes a lot of sense. It's like, no, this is pretty great for a paladin class. So
really strong sorcerers.
And that's, I mean, they obviously, that would be a great flavor for a dragonborn. They can literally do anything. We talked about all sorts of different dragonborn came across in that Eberron game because of the backstory I had for my character. So it was just like really neat to see, like, no, that race is very versatile in what it can do, because everyone can use a breath weapon. Everyone can use a breath weapon.
Well, see, it's funny because my number 2 is actually sourced from Eberron. So yours started from an Eberron campaign. Mine's sourced from Eberron. So mine is Shifter, which came out when the Eberron campaign setting came out for 3.5. And at the time, they're basically, if people don't know, shifters are aware-touched people. The story itself was the fact that lycanthropes did exist on regular Eberron for a very long time. Eventually, the disease mutated so much that it caused infections throughout the population. But by that time, there was already basically lycanthropes that bred with humans. And so this was a true-blooded creature, a shifter. Eventually, the lycanthropes were taken off that plane, run out by the silver flame to Lamania. And so the only thing that was left that was allowed basically were these shifters. And of course, I think everybody had probably played enough of their own part where, hey, I want to be aware of something, that they made this class.
Oh, yeah. The second edition campaign that I played for freaking ever, there were tigers all over the place.
I mean, I even played a weretiger in 3.5 in Eberron around shifters. And the idea was that, the were person around shifters is like, well, you already had these people that are willing to back you on what you wanted to do, because you're basically like a purified version of what they value themselves as. But I like them, of course, from a thematic standpoint, but you guys all know me. It comes down to being able to do something really well, and shifters, shape changes, all the various things they eventually got made it so that you could focus on pretty much doing anything you want and have your base be like a natural animal that can kind of assist. Eventually could even fly. Eventually you even had shifting that made you wiser and better at casting spells, so you could even be a better cleric or a druid.
So if you were you a druid?
When I played a shifter?
Yeah.
Ranger.
Okay.
Ranger. Yeah.
Because like honestly, that's like you get like a casting form as a druid, That'd be awesome.
It's like, yeah, it's because it's actually kind of really interesting also with the story, because there's 13 moons in Eberron. So that's why lycanthropy is such an intense thing there. It's like, well, there's basically always a full moon. And the idea is that this was a dream walker, had a better connection with the moons itself. So it's like apparently like the base of who they are.
That's cool.
Deals with being better casters. But no, I played a long tooth shifter, which was a +2 to strength and gave you a bite attack. Now, if you were a barbarian, you could rage, and then your bonus to strength with a shifting would stack on top of your rage, which didn't happen very often in 3.5. Now it still stacks, no matter, like everything stacks now in 5th edition, but they don't have as many options as 5th edition shifter, but it still has that same, like, I'm a beast man. I'm Wolverine. I can act like Wolverine, and it just carries through perfectly, through what the whole class build is.
I like the way you describe that. Everyone wants to play Wolverine. It's right there in the name.
Yeah.
Wolverine and dragons.
Yeah. Lets you do a small rage without having to go full barbarian, and gives you like that were creature light that, because everybody likes playing werewolves, but like it's clunky to like be cursed with lycanthropy and all that stuff, but this way you just shift a little bit so you could get into, because nobody wants to turn into a wolf either. They want to be a wolf man and wield their axe at the same time.
I always did kind of like that idea though, of if you have lycanthropy in my campaign, I kind of want to just like once every 3 weeks, I'm going to take control of your character for like one evening. And then you will figure out later what happens.
It's not ever gonna be good.
It's not, but I think it would be cool. It's like, no, like it could range from somebody found you naked, woke up in a pig pen, and it's like, oh, it's a little bit of a scandal, or it's just like, hey, there was a family murdered on the edge of town and nobody knows what it was, but there were claw marks.
Well, and in like earlier editions though, if you were a werewolf, oh, well, you're evil. You're chaotic evil. You
had to be. You didn't have a choice. Yeah.
Are you a were-tiger? Oh, you're just neutral. You're always neutral.
And then it was the were-bears that were chaotic good. Chaotic good, yeah.
Weird, right? And they had rats and they had other things too.
Were-bear would be a fun character to play.
I remember the stat bonuses from 3.5, the important ones.
They're
+12 to strength.
They're dumb. Yes, I remember seeing the stat block.
+8 to constitution. They just took what a bear was and put it on you.
Added it to a human. It's just like, there you go.
Yeah, one of the first things I ever bought for D&D was in basic D&D was something that lets you take levels in a were creature to slowly like gain the powers and gain more control over the transformation. And so like it's that desire to play werewolves has been around for a long time because they're cool.
Sure.
It's actually how I leveled that were-tiger. Was every level was I could choose a +1 level adjustment or the base hit die for the character. It's the only way.
You multi-classed into were-tiger?
No, that's my primary class is what we worked it up because it's like they give you hit die and it gives you a bonus to your challenge rating too. So you have to pick levels where you don't get any hit die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I think Ben, what's your second? What's your number 2?
Number 2 would be elves, just because.
That's a good choice.
Yeah, I think my favorite character I ever played, Eodred, was an elf wizard, and I just went full on like gray elf, like basically like from the fairy realm. Elves as haughty as possible, immortal, lives and breathes magic. Yeah, I mean, I always liked fairy stuff, and elves are basically the closest to that as a player race. And when I say fairy stuff, like I'm leaning more towards like the hidden folk, not like tiny fairies. Like you can play in, gnomes are pretty close to like that, like, tiny forest being with illusions and stuff like that. But like, elves are like the regal, do not mess with the people of the forest. They will steal your children and poison your crops type thing. And I like that. And, I tend to make elves, it's kind of almost cliche now to make elves a little bit darker. But once I realized that elves could be a little bit different flavor than just like the Tolkien, like we are perfect and serene and live in the forest where we craft, I don't know, a lot of the aesthetic
Legolas,
stuff
like
elves,
everyone was like, everyone wants to play Legolas if they play an elf.
No, and I like, I never played WoW, but like the night elves from WoW are like, that looks kind of creepy. Even if they're on your side, you like don't want to be left alone in the woods with a bunch of those people. Like, yeah, so
It's funny because the night elves are based on the drow
yeah,
tonally.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
they're
now,
still good. They're still like your normal good natured elves in general. Like by their flavor, they are pretty much just regular elves. But they worship a moon goddess, and they're called the night elves because they're active in the dark. So it's like they're purple skinned, they have light colored hair.
yeah.
They hide
I
the
thought that
spirit
was
shadow.
a clever twist of like the tropes.
Yeah.
And then when they brought in the blood elves, they were like, oh, these look like the high elves, but they're the bad guys because they use dark magic and stuff. So yeah, I thought it was
That is all subjective in the world of Warhammer.
You played
I mean,
Horde. You
I played
shut your
Horde.
mouth. I played dwarves. Note
Okay,
I didn't
at the time I
I-
started, it's the only way you could play a druid was play Horde.
I didn't say alliance. I played dwarves.
That's not true, isn't it? I just all my friends were on Horde side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I look at the Horde as like the bad guys trying, like the anti-heroes,
Yeah.
trying to, they have the opportunity to become good guys. So
Oh, there's plenty of information to support like the alliance of the bad guys and the horde of the good guys.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of
I definitely would have been Horde if I played. So,
yeah.
But like what you were saying, Ben, about the forest people, though, it just it's one of my favorite quotes from Magic the Gathering. Is it's on Land of War Elves, and it says one bone broken for every twig snapped.
yeah.
Is and I'm like, that is exactly what you just described right there. It's like,
Mhm.
do not come in here. It's not for you.
I recently have firsthand experience that like all the good elves are mana, black, and green. It's just like there's green, obviously, but there's some seriously black elves out there. It's like black thematic elves. Like there's one that's like every upkeep, someone sacrifice a non-elf creature because it is murdering things.
Yeah, it's just going through and assassinating people at night.
Yeah, it's an assassin elf, and it's just stabbing shit at everyone's upkeep.
It also doesn't shock me that you like something that's weird and dark.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite elves from a story are from the Broken Sword by Paul Anderson, because they're kind of closer to the Eladrin elves with like starry field eyes, really tall, converse with gods more often than mortals, but they're like unseen by people most of the time. They ride around at night, but yeah, creepy, otherworldly. We're in a war against the trolls, and if humans die, and who cares?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the Eladrin, because what I like about the elves now is the range that you have with the type of elf you want to play, because people have taken that idea from the Lord of the Rings and through tabletop RPGs have expanded on that so much. The Eladrin are like the super fancy fey elves. You do have high elves and wood elves and dark elves. And then I think there are celestial attuned elves from space. I think that's in one of the settings.
The astral elves. I don't know much about
The astral elves. Yeah, astral elves.
Just read about those guys.
Yeah. And what I really like what they've done recently is they released Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse. Really, honestly, great book. All three of us have it. I know. So they put the Eladrin in there. They put a lot of the normally considered like evil races, like the Durgar, the dark gnomes or the deep gnomes, I think are in there. Svirfneblin, I think those are in there.
Never really living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Eladrin are in there. I think they also put the bugbears and hobgoblins are in there as well. They have like at least 20 new playable races. That's really, really cool. But what I really like about, they've found a way to take what was popularized by Middle Earth and expand on it so much. I like the flavor of the drow. I think it's funny that everyone kind of tries to do the same thing with the drow. When they make a drow character, they're just like, I want to make an anti-hero elf, an anti-hero dark elf, because that's the only way you can really do it in most campaigns. But then when we had the opportunity to like play warlocks that were doing evil shit, I was like, I'm gonna make a drow. Like evil drow are so good. Like they're just so much fun to play. They're just like, no, like these things are engineered to be evil. Like let them be evil if they're gonna play one. Like at least like chaotic neutral. You can get away like a chaotic neutral drow.
Well, what about Dritz, the Drow Ranger?
He's supposed to be an exception. That's the whole point. I did have a Drizzt deck though. That was fun.
Yeah. All right. So what's number one, guys?
Well, I've already kind of mentioned it
Okay.
as dwarves. My number one is dwarves.
I am shocked.
Yeah, I know. And it is legitimately because of the Hobbit. I will say right now, just the theme of their culture, the runic side of like Norse culture mixed with just the Scottish accent and the giant beards. I've always really liked the idea that they come off as really stern, but they're honestly just like the funniest races. Like they will use that to their advantage to just like crack jokes. And it's just like, I like how hardy the race is. I really like like when someone says like they're gonna play a fighter, I'm like, you are playing a dwarf, right? It's like when they say like I want to play something really tanky, I want to play something really resilient. I'm just like, well, you're playing a dwarf. You have to. That's what they do. One of the most impressive things to me, one of the most impressive classes in third edition to me was a prestige class, Dwarven Defender.
Oh yeah.
I really just liked that aesthetic, just like it's what I want. So dwarves are number one for me, and I really like Durgar are in Monsters of the Multiverse. They did really good job of sticking to that psionic heritage that they have from third edition and kind of embellishing their history so that they don't have to be like the evil dark dwarves. They're their own race with their own, like they live in the Underdark. That doesn't necessarily make them evil. I think that's kind of neat. But dwarves in general, I normally just like, because of the Hobbit, I like playing Dwalin. You know,
Yeah.
Dwalin from the Hobbit is like, that's the dwarf I want to play.
I mean, like my opinion on dwarves has been changed by knowing you, Sean. Like I wouldn't have given anything really a second thought if it wasn't for you in the first place. So I mean, kudos.
I think that's because of that 3.5 game we played in Savannah. I was like, no, I'll play a dwarf. I'll play a magus, but I'll play a dwarf magus.
It was
like, oh, so much fun.
Your birthday party where you had Ben run a game where everybody was dwarves.
That was true. The all dwarf campaign.
That was so much fun. That was so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben knows how to please a crowd.
He really does.
And by a crowd, I mean me.
Yeah. And I think dwarves are another race that got like a big bump in third edition. Like previously, before that, a lot of times they were depicted as, you know, and even in most like a lot of classic Tolkien artwork, they're just depicted as like short humans with big noses and big beards. But you don't look at them and think, oh, that thing looks really tough or really strong, because they're just like half the height of a normal human. They're more like,
they looked like garden gnomes in like most of the time. It's like, no, they look like garden gnomes, like a little bit taller.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, third edition, they're like stocky and like as wide as they are tall, and it's all muscle. And you're like, oh, okay, this is cool.
Right.
And obviously they were like, in the player's handbook, I think they were probably the most powerful race with all their bonus abilities.
I think, yeah, because they were the ones that's like, okay, they move at 25 feet. Like their their normal movement speed is 25 feet, but they're always moving 25 feet.
Which edition? Yeah.
Third edition.
Third edition.
So Gnome, I think technically actually had a one up if you look at like what they got versus then added benefits. I think statistically it's the Gnome, but no one ever remembers the Gnome.
Well, it's because the gnomes.
It's not interesting.
The gnomes started off with spells. That's why.
Yeah.
The gnome started off with spells, and it's like that's the only thing, and it's just like it's kind of limited. They got prestidigitation.
Dwarves got like, you know, +2 con, and the only offside was -2 charisma, which
everybody dumps anyway.
Yeah, a lot of people do, and I mean they're +2 bonus against all spells in third edition. That's ridiculous. You know, the stone cunning stuff, which came up, but there was a lot big dungeon focus in the early third edition, so that came up. All the player dwarf characters are like, I have +2 stone cunning, does that help like anything?
Yeah.
And, you know, and you're like, it's made out of rock, sure. Like,
I would say that's kind of all right. So there is like this one drawback to playing a dwarf is that you are kind of pigeonholed into, if you're going to play a dwarf, like yeah, you can play a dwarf wizard, you can play a dwarf sorcerer. That is kind of a neat flavor to it because it's not expected by most dwarven cultures. But it's like, if you're playing a dwarf fighter or a dwarf, any of the melee classes, like a dwarf fighter, a dwarf barbarian, even Like dwarf barbarians are nuts because you get the bonus to constitution. It's just like in third edition, that's like you rage longer than everybody else because you're a fucking dwarf. Nobody knows how to rage like you. And then or paladins or clerics, like they make awesome clerics normally.
Although,
most
like,
of the time
a spellcaster being tougher is never a bad thing either.
Yeah,
So
true.
And
I really like the idea of a dwarf wizard being very successful because it's just like they figured out their mind is a machine that does magic. It's like, yeah, no, it's awesome. Like I love that kind of flavor. But my top is going to be dwarves. I will all like anytime someone's like, hey, do you want to let's roll a new game? What do you want to play? My first thought is like, do I want to play a dwarf? Because the answer is half the time, yes.
Half the time, yes. Well, okay. So the number one, I'm gonna walk you through this story. All right. So you talked
Paint me a picture.
You talked about Dragonborn. Okay, so Dragonborn came from a book called Races of the Dragon, which was a third in a line of books they did in 3.5. The first one was Races of Stone, the second one being Races of Wild. Races of Stone came out first, and that is where they introduced the Goliath race, which, if nobody understands that was when they finally expanded like powerful build outside of the psionic half giant. But they gave them the benefits of strength running. So it was a big splash, big hit. And it basically set this precedent that these other book series are going to have a key race that defines like the new way people are going to play. So Goliath was great. Then Races of the Wild came out. And what that is about, that has like elves, halflings, gnomes. And the new race they added in that one was Raptorians, which was bird people. If you read the thing about it, talked about them being bird people. They lived in nests. They flew. They couldn't fall and die because they had wings that would catch them. Very interesting. They were bird people. They got better at using their wings. The higher level they got, they're bird people. That was it. Then they had a section that was called Other Races. All the way at the bottom of that was a race that was brand new for this book that they didn't talk about. It was called Killoren. And Killoren are the best thing ever, in my opinion, because you guys already talked about that my favorite class is Druid. Well, that's their favorite class too. And they did that because Killoren are thematically fey humans that are a basically immunosystem response to the wild being attacked. They live like humans, they die like humans, they have the passion of humans, they can learn like humans. They could basically be warriors for nature, which of course, as everyone knows, aligns with really what I like to play as most of the time. But then there's the kicker is that they also had these three aspects called, like, I forget if they called them aspects of nature. But anyway, every day you got to pick if you were an aspect of the destroyer, an aspect of the hunter, or an aspect of the ancient. And in doing so, you got separate powers that made you different every day. The hunter was, of course, much better at stalking prey and actually attacking things, right? So if you played a Killoren Ranger, you'd probably stay into hunter sometimes. But sometimes maybe you wanted to be caster, so you went into ancient. You got bonuses to, like, once per day, you could tap into your heritage of knowledge and gain an immense bonus to a knowledge check. So you could know something that was God level right from the get-go simply because you attached into this natural world. But then, of course, there was aspect of the destroyer, which was the fun one, which turned your leaves that made up your skin dark and gave you a smite against the unnatural. The unnatural being anything that wasn't a naturally occurring thing. So again, gave druids a smite on top of it. Or if you wanted to, you could play a paladin that had that smite on top of their smites. The thing is, it was a smite. So in 3.5, you could take the feat extra smiting and gain 2 more smites of this smite. You could do that over and over again, and it wouldn't have been a bad use for all of your feats because you just would have been a druid with all these additional smites against everything you want to. So for me, it was that they made a race that gave a reason to be the warrior for nature, and then they incentivized it with all these fun little tools in it. So you already could customize all you wanted to if you were doing the best class in the world, druid, you know, and then you had these extra flair on top of it. It really made my day when they came out with it. And I was so upset because they were so much richer in concept and fuel, like when it comes to a character development, than bird people.
Aarakocra. Yeah.
Yeah. Other things that were on that other races were things like cat folk, centaurs, and gnolls, right? But these had all existed before in some other splat book or something like that. very interesting to play, of course, but Kilren was brand new and they just hit it right at the end. And they didn't, and no one even talked about it when the thing was being announced. So to me, Race of the Wild was for Kilren and not what it was anything else.
Yeah, and that's interesting because they could have just done like, these are druid people, they're made out of plants, and like gave them some really generic plant abilities, but no, they made them like nature defenders, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, they're supposed to be Fey, right? So they, like, one of their drawbacks was, I remember it was really actually quite upsetting. It was called Cold Iron Anathema. So I couldn't actually pick up cold iron weapons, or I took a minus to all of my attacks, but that was the only drawback from it. And then you could be targeted by Fey, but the thing is you couldn't be held by most things. You couldn't be mind control, couldn't be charmed, because all these things were for humanoid. You were Fey. And elves weren't Fey then. They were humanoids. Another benefit.
Yeah.
But yes, Kilren. Favorite
I think
race.
I think it's interesting now that the humanoid descriptor is like pretty much useless now. Like you can't, there's really no reason to have it in 5th edition. It doesn't target specific things anymore.
Yeah.
It's always just like pick a thing, do this to it. And it's like
Well, they just kind of realized you don't have to be one thing. You could be a humanoid undead or a humanoid Fey. Like you can cross over these things, and that way you don't have like, you know, technically this is a Fey, it has to have these hit dice and these skill points, and you know, the weird building blocks of 3rd edition. They kind of smoothed over some of those parts.
It was a sign of the times. They haven't reprinted this for 5th edition. At least not from what I understand.
they haven't.
No. I've seen homebrew versions of it, but I just
it is interesting because I haven't seen, I was going to say, I haven't seen anything about Kilren ever. So, and like I didn't buy any of the later D&D 3rd edition modules or rule books or anything. I went from 3.5 to Pathfinder, then to 5th edition. So I didn't really hit any of those late term. So I'm wondering, is there like a 5th edition equivalent to that?
people have homebrewed it
Yeah.
before. It's just a lot of things have options, and it's like with the benefits of like what they do now, which is like you can make any, like just pick whatever skill bonuses you want this, and it's like so we're just giving a race that, like, you know, per day can just be better at hitting or better at hunting or better at knowing than everybody else. Is like, that seems like, well, if you want to do one thing, this seems like this would be the best option to do it. I mean, because everything else they have now, all the different races are a lot more about flavor, right? But if they already took away the value of being what a Fae is because they distributed it out to so many different things, so like, what makes them unique in the first place? Why are they worth printing as well? There's a lot of different reasons. I'm also not a game designer, but if anybody from Wizards of the Coast happens to be listening to this, please kill a run. If you guys are making Cardinal Angel people in the next edition, you can make Kill a Run, I'm sure.
Seems like they're able to do something with it. I swear it's reminding me of something else, but I can't put my finger on it. That's picks different aspects. I mean, Eladrin kind of do something similar.
Yeah.
They have seasons. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was going to say. The Eladrin gets seasons.
It's very interesting.
But they also get that like teleport, that like dimension, whatever phase step it is that they get.
Well, Ben,
right.
Mine was obviously very passionate, so I can't wait to hear what your number one is. I think it's going to
Mine is humans. Good night, everybody.
Cut to the outro.
No, I've always been I've played humans because like Josh said earlier, it's, it lets you kind of focus on everything else about the character, because humans are kind of a baseline, but also like, I'm just, D&D got me into history and folklore and all this stuff. So I like, a lot of verisimilitude, a lot of basing stuff on real world things in my fantasy games. And, humans are a big part of most real world history and folklore, more so than orcs and
probably elves, maybe not as much as
and
elves.
so much. Elves. The elves didn't write much down, so they got kind of jilted on history. I kind of like, even as a DM in general, I like human centric settings where the known lands are mostly ruled by humans, and then like dwarves, all the other races, even the more common ones like elves and dwarves, I kind of like to be a little bit rare and a little bit, hidden away in the magical places of the world. And the thing is, you can always, in a D&D campaign, there should be like an inciting incident of like, what's going on, what has changed recently that requires a call to adventure. And part of that can be like, oh, well, there's like more magical activity. So, whereas your grandfather heard rumors of elves in the woods, like you as a young adventurer, like not only have you seen elves in the woods yourself, but like they're walking into town and talking to people now. So like, I don't know, I just like the baseline of elves. It lets you kind of be kind of grounded. You can draw in a lot from real world history. I think I've seen some recommendations sometimes of like, well, sometimes, if you want to model different fantasy races in a world, you can just like give different human cultural things to different races. Like the elves are like this people and the dwarves are like this people. And there's some weird cultural appropriation issues that can come up with that.
Yeah.
But also in the folklore, it's not like dwarves were, in English, like in Norse folklore, dwarves weren't Spaniards or some other like nearby people. They spoke the same language as the people they lived around. They were just, hidden in a cave somewhere most of the time, or had a kingdom underground or whatever. So I like tying them into the human culture more than having separate different, here's the elf forest and here's the dwarf mountain and here's the human plains or whatever. Like, no, like the humans rule all these things, but like I like to lean a little more of the supernatural side of those creatures, and making them rare, I think, helps that. I think when you have like, another thing I don't like is when you make elves or dwarves or anything like that too mundane. Like I remember seeing like one of the Pathfinder stock characters was like an elf who like had the urchin background and grew up on the streets. And I'm like, elves don't grow up on streets. That feels wrong to me. Like the idea of like seeing like a little, I'm starving, I need more food, and it's like an elf. It's like, I mean, obviously you can come up with some story that would make sense, but like it just seems weird to me that would be like a common thing even in a fantasy world, because it just doesn't feel very fantasy anymore. It just feels like you're just it feels more sci-fi if everybody just kind of blends together.
Yeah, I think those genres have kind of blurred quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's obviously, this is just my personal preference. Sometimes I like I also like campaigns where everybody's weird, goofy stuff. Sometimes like the Mos Eisley Cantina campaigns where everybody's I don't really fundamentally have a problem with that either. It's just when I'm running a setting, that's my baseline, is that it's a little bit more grounded in real world.
I feel like, it makes the stories a little bit more relatable too, right? Yeah. Because we're supposed to be, the whole thing about humans is that they have the most limited lifespan of most of the other races, right? Mm-hmm. We can kind of identify, like, I feel like that's a way we put our own, like, life is short mentality into playing a character. It's like, no, I understand that, like, by age 20, this person probably has a lot of energy and wants to focus on one thing very intently. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it's why we'll play this character who's like really good at this one thing. It's like, we kind of just understand that mindset of playing a human. And I think it's always like, for easy role play, I think humans are like the easiest to role play, because it's like, okay, for elves or dwarves or gnomes, like you have to exaggerate so much like one facet of a personality, because you're like the dwarf has to be kind of like really obstinate, really stubborn, like stone, and then like the elves have to be kind of just like aloof and know more than everybody else. So you stay, you can do whatever you want with that. And then gnomes are supposed to be like whimsical and magical and like probably a little goofy. I don't know, like however you want to play it.
The human fighter though could be an expert violinist, and that's not a weird thing at all.
That's not a weird thing at all.
No, because I wanted to do all these things.
Yeah,
30 more years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I really like.
You don't have any like predetermined stereotypes. Your human fighter could be, big and strong, or quick and fast, or really smart, or really charming, or whatever. And none of those things are like, oh, you're playing against type, or or that's not what humans are like in my campaign, which is
It was like,
what?
Could you go back and tell me what happened in this world to fundamentally change them?
Yeah,
because I would be interested in knowing that, trying to role play.
Yeah,
this, if that's not how they're they're like. Yeah, you're better off doing that with like a dwarf for sure. Like dwarves aren't like that. And it's like, oh, are they just like the mountain dwelling things? Yes, they're exactly what you.
That's what they are. Yes.
Yeah.
You got to have a do it under that mode to see. I can't help myself.
I know. It's part of why we love you so much.
You can also just play an obstinate Scottish human if you want.
You know, it's funny. It's funny. I've never thought of that.
Yeah.
I was just like, I've always just been like, oh, if I want that flavor, I'm gonna play a dwarf.
You would play the obstinate Scottish human. You'd get into a dungeon and you'd touch the walls and you'd be like, I don't know what rock this is. Huh.
I can't tell the history of this stone.
It's not singing to me.
A party of humans cosplaying as other races.
That actually is basically what role playing in other races.
Yeah.
So they're also playing a role-playing game. This is getting very fourth wall.
Very meta.
I mean, when talking about races talking to each other, it's like, well, you have to, we're obviously all human beings talking to each other. So there has to be a baseline. But the reality of it is like, no, I don't know what an alien mind is like because I've never been one. I don't know how an octopus thinks, but that could definitely be a race of octopus people. And I would have to role play that somehow. So, I mean, it's going to feel a bit human, you know?
Yeah.
Hey, why aren't there octopus people?
Oh, there are. They're called mind flayers.
Those are not
A bit different.
octopi.
Yeah, I know.
There's so many different aquatic races. It is kind of weird that.
Yeah, there's Shahugan or shark people, merfolk, people, fish.
They're aquatic elves.
Kuatoa.
They're
sea
even
elves,
water elves.
Lokatha.
Yeah.
There's like aquatic versions of tons of old school monsters. There's like aquatic ghouls and trolls, and
They're all just different kinds of elves at this point.
It was actually more impressive that we were able to narrow down to 8 things worth talking about.
Well, and not only that, like the one that we had on in our list were like the opposite sides for like very different but valid reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's really neat. That's one of the best things about tabletop RPGs is that honestly, if you have an idea for a character, you can find something that's going to fit it really well. If you want to play like a half giant, if you want to play a fairy, they came out with fairies in Mordenkainen's, the newest Mordenkainen's. So like you can, like Ben was talking earlier about how he likes playing the more like fantastical fake creatures. Like they literally gave you fairies in the most recent book that came out. So it's really cool how you can do that. And it's not just in D&D, it's in most tabletop RPGs. Like if you're going for whatever system, like Pathfinder has a slew of different races you can pick for all of the different race character options, class options too. So that's one of the best things about playing an RPG is being able to customize a class like that.
It all starts with a race.
All starts with race and or class.
Or
When you're
background.
building the character.
Or background.
You have to have the race first.
You have to have the backstory. Ben's right. You start with a backstory.
No, I said background.
No, we're not talking about
Background is just one chunk. Backstory is like, I want to go fight stuff.
Backstory is the lifeblood. I think that's good,
I am
guys.
also tormented.
Yeah.
It's like, you know how little that narrows it down? And that's it for season 1 of Roll Havoc. Thank you all for listening. We've had such a great time talking about RPGs and interacting with all of you. Please keep an eye out for season 2 coming up. And remember, in the meantime, if you're interested in getting to know a nerd, the easiest way is to take him out on a D8. That's it for us. And we will see you next time on Roll Havoc.
Yay!